Let's start off this morning by taking you through where coronavirus cases stand in Australia. And the number of cases in Australia has passed 3,600 as those tough quarantine measures for international travellers come into effect. Let's take a look at the latest figures on coronavirus around the country throughout the different states and territories. There are now a total of 3,640 confirmed cases in Australia and 14 deaths from the virus. New South Wales remains by far the highest number of cases, with a total of 1,617. There are concerns that the number there could increase more, with thousands of travellers expected to arrive at airports today, although they will be facing those tough quarantine measures that came into effect at midnight last night, where they'll have to spend the first 2 weeks in isolation in a hotel or other sort of facility.
Meanwhile, in the state of Victoria, there are 685 cases, and the total number in Queensland currently sits at 625. South Australia has 287 cases and Western Australia has 278 cases right now. Of course, we've got those 2 cruise ships just docked at Fremantle Port at the moment. Several of those passengers on board are from New Zealand. They're awaiting a flight to go back to New Zealand, and no doubt they will also be facing quarantine as soon as they get back home. In the ACT, there are 71 confirmed cases so far. Tasmania has recorded 62 cases, and the Northern Territory still the lowest for now, 15 confirmed cases. Now, these tough new quarantine restrictions that Joe was talking about a little earlier, they're in place for all travellers arriving in Australia to help slow the spread of coronavirus.
International passengers flying into Sydney are now required to go into self-isolation in city hotels, and our reporter Lily Mayers is in Sydney. We'll also be joined by our reporter James Hancock, who's in Melbourne this morning. Lily, we might go to you first. What's happening there at Sydney Airport this morning?
Good morning, Joe. Well, as those new tougher restrictions on international travellers have come into force, all arrivals here at Sydney Airport will collect their bags before being ferried onto waiting buses, where they'll be taken to hotels in the city and put into supervised self-isolation for 2 weeks. We understand all arrivals will be given care packages of food and other essentials. Police have told friends and families to stay away from the airport today. They won't be able to see travellers who are getting off planes here. Police and the military have spent the morning walking the grounds and being briefed. Charter buses have just turned up here and they're waiting for passengers. So it was a quiet morning, but it's starting to get a bit busier now, as we're expecting the first couple of international flights have just landed.
Lily, we just went through the numbers in each state and territory, and by far New South Wales has the most amount of coronavirus cases. So it'll be interesting to see what impact these tough new quarantine measures have in New South Wales, particularly given that the vast majority of cases in Australia are from overseas travellers.
That's right. In New South Wales, we now have 1,617 cases of coronavirus. 212 of those have been diagnosed since Friday night alone. Yesterday, a 91-year-old woman died after contracting the virus. She had been a resident of the Dorothy Henderson Aged Care Facility in Macquarie Park, and her death has marked the 8th in New South Wales, and it's brought the national tally to 14. Of the cases in New South Wales, 22 are being treated in intensive care units, Joe, and 11 of those are requiring ventilators.
All right, that's the situation in Sydney and in New South Wales. We want to cross over the border now and go to Victoria. James Hancock is in Melbourne for us. You're at Brighton Beach at the moment, James. It's quite a quiet day there, no crowds.
It is certainly quiet for this time of morning on a Sunday, but it's been warmer in recent days, a little cooler this morning here in Melbourne, down at the beach at least. But many Victorian beaches are now closed. But what you can and can't do between the councils does differ, and some people have complained of mixed messages. So I'm at Brighton. This is Bayside Council. The council says its beaches are closed. Surf Coast Council yesterday also made a similar move, closing its beaches after busy scenes leading down to Point Addis. But Surf Coast Council says its beaches are only closed to large gatherings, so people can still surf there, they can go for a walk, they can run along the beach, but people need to social distance. Mornington Peninsula Council says its beaches are totally off limits, but people were there using their beaches yesterday. Port Phillip Council, a little closer to central Melbourne, it says that people can still walk, run, take a quick dip, but sunbaking won't be allowed on its closed beaches. Yesterday morning, we were at Port Melbourne and we saw police officers ordering everyone off the sand at that beach. So the arrangements differ between the councils, but the state government says that it will move in and close all beaches if people don't do the right thing. That continuing message from the state government here in Victoria has been that if you can stay at home, you should stay at home, but people are allowed out to exercise, and that includes a visit to the beach.
Now, the state's chief health officer had some very stern words for Victorians who were misbehaving.
Yeah, the state's chief health officer, Dr Brett Sutton, took to Twitter late yesterday to slam the behaviour of some Victorians. Of course, on Friday we saw beaches at St Kilda packed. Yesterday, beaches were much quieter than that around the state, but even still, Dr Brett Sutton took to Twitter describing the behaviour of some Victorians as really crap. He warned that we could see thousands of deaths in Australia. Now, this came after the biggest spike in cases yet in Victoria. Overnight, from Friday into Saturday, the number of cases jumped 111 to 685 cases in Victoria. That was the last update we received yesterday morning. We'll get another update from authorities today.
All right, and we look forward to that update. James Hancock there reporting for us in Melbourne. Thank you. And Lily Mayers in Sydney. Thank you.
Well, the government has announced another $1.1 billion will be injected into health and social support funding, with domestic violence believed to be on the rise during the coronavirus pandemic. A series of initiatives are expected to be announced on Sunday today, including an initial $150 million to help victims of domestic violence. $670 million will be to bolster Medicare, including an initial figure of $74 million towards mental health services. The majority of the money will fund GP consultations to take the pressure off hospitals and emergency departments. Bulk billing payments will be doubled, with incentive payments for doctors who see patients face-to-face for conditions that cannot be dealt with using telehealth services. Funding will be reviewed at the end of September.
New Zealand passengers on the Artania cruise ship, currently docked at Fremantle Port in WA, have now left the ship and are being transferred to Perth Airport for flights back to New Zealand. At least 46 people on board are reportedly experiencing coronavirus symptoms, with 9 confirmed cases already transferred to private hospitals in Perth.
3 more cases of coronavirus have been confirmed in Tasmania overnight, bringing the state's total to 62. 2 of the cases are related to recent overseas travel, and 1 is linked to the Voyager of the Seas cruise ship. Meanwhile, an investigation into an infected healthcare employee at the Mersey Community Hospital has revealed the worker spent no more than 30 minutes at the hospital while contagious.
Overseas, and the US President Donald Trump says he is considering sealing off the entire state of New York, where coronavirus cases have passed 52,000 and more than 700 people have died. Mr. Trump has also flagged that 2 other states, New Jersey and Connecticut, could be quarantined. There are now over 100,000 confirmed cases in the US.
I am now considering, and will make a decision very quickly, very shortly, a quarantine, because it's such a hot area, of New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. We'll be announcing that one way or the other fairly soon.
In Italy, the number of people who've died from the coronavirus since the outbreak began has now passed 10,000. Nearly 890 people died overnight. That's slightly fewer than the previous day. Italy's death toll is the largest in the world, with more than 3 times the number of deaths than in China.
And authorities in Spain believe cases of the virus are close to the peak in some areas of the country. The nation has recorded its highest daily total of coronavirus deaths so far, with 832 new cases overnight. It brings Spain's death toll to nearly 5,700. That's second only to Italy worldwide.
The number of people in the UK who have died from the coronavirus has risen above 1,000. The latest government figures show more than a quarter of the deaths happened in the last 24 hours leading up to Friday night. Around 17,000 people have now tested positive for the virus in the UK.
And British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is working remotely following his announcement on Friday that he'd confirmed positive for coronavirus. Mr Johnson has been communicating with colleagues via video call as the number of cases continues to rise in the UK.
The Prime Minister is showing mild symptoms. He continues to lead the government's effort in combating COVID-19. This morning he held a video conference call, and he will continue to lead right from the front on this. But I think the one thing this has reminded us is that no one is immune.
Indonesia's capital, Jakarta, is extending its state of emergency after another surge in the number of cases there. Indonesia's total cases jumped by 10% to almost 1,200, and 102 people have now died from the virus.